and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Robert Winfrey. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Tonight we're going to be deviating slightly from the normal format, just as a heads up for everyone. We're having a few minor technical difficulties as we are recording live. There's something wrong with Jeff's connection. We're not sure what it is, but we are working on it. Still nothing on his end, which is, again, this is frustrating because Skype is usually so reliable, so my apologies. But here to fill some of the gap time, again, normally tonight we will be going over UFC Fight Night 138, an abysmally long show. We'll be previewing UFC 230. That should be a lot of fun. And we will talk over all the major news. But since we're going to kind of break from the format just a little bit, here back for a special appearance. He swore off MMA for a little bit a few months ago. Pat Mullen is back because he had some thoughts on the recent... It's being called a trade by the media, despite it not being actually a trade in the traditional sense of the word. But the UFC and ONE FC, a major MMA promotion out of Southeast Asia, came to a mutually beneficial decision. The UFC released former flyweight champion Demetrious Johnson from his contract, and ONE FC released the essentially retired former welterweight champion of theirs, Ben Askren, and Demetrious then signed with ONE, and Ben Askren then signed with the UFC. I have my own thoughts on this, but Pat has a couple of minutes to say his piece here. That's what he wanted, so I'm happy to give him the time for this. So, Pat, you had thoughts. You wanted to share them. Happy to have you back on the show for however long you'd like to be here. So, what are your thoughts on this? What spurred your decision to be on this for this? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert. Pleasure to be speaking with you again. So, if those of you who've been listening to this show for any length of time will remember, I was so disgusted by the judging and the fallout from the Demetrious Johnson Henry Cejudo rematch, where people allegedly thought Cejudo won that fight. He didn't. And rather than address the controversy, rather than act as though Demetrious Johnson hadn't been this great champion who was deserving of its shot at his title that he defended, the only man who had held the belt to that point, had made himself the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, defending that title night in, night out, and just going out there and being the best fighter in the world, rather than address that and give this guy a rematch, which he had more than willingly expressed an interest in as soon as it was announced he didn't win the fight, but had clearly earned the right to. Immediately that was all scrapped, and commentary was steered to direct things towards a fight between Henry Cejudo and bantamweight champion T.J. Dillashaw. Now, I claimed during this fallout that this is because the UFC does not want Demetrious Johnson to be a champion. The UFC did not want Demetrious Johnson, period, because they felt that he produced low ratings on their TV shows where he was headlining, and that the flyweight division was not worth having as long as he was the champion, because he wasn't going to be beaten by anybody, and he wasn't beaten by anybody. I don't care officially in the ledger if it says that Henry Cejudo won their rematch. The only people who believe Henry Cejudo won that fight are people who don't know what fighting is in Henry Cejudo. So I claim that this was step one of the UFC's process to just rid themselves of Demetrious Johnson. And everybody's like, no, you're crazy. Take the tinfoil hat off. Well, here we are. And now we don't have another Demetrious Johnson fight booked. Even if it wasn't a rematch for the title, do they have him fighting anybody else? Say a Ray Borg, Wilson Hayes, anybody? Nope. What they've done is basically participated in an unofficial trade wherein they released Demetrious Johnson from his UFC contract in order to allow him to sign with ONE FC based over in Asia. And ONE FC agreed to release their welterweight champion Ben Askren from his contract to allow him to sign with the UFC. Here's where it gets fun. For those of you who've never seen Ben Askren fight, I'm going to just tell you what he is. Ben Askren is arguably the best pound-for-pound grappler that mixed martial arts has ever seen. It's either him or Khabib, and it's close. It's arguable. The difference is that Ben Askren, for those of you who got familiar with him in Bellator will attest to, is very, very boring to watch fight. He makes Colby Covington seem like Robbie Lawler, to put it into perspective. This guy doesn't strike unless he has to, which doesn't often happen because he's too good of a wrestler to not take the fight to the ground immediately, gain top position, and work for a submission or hold position or throw strikes that aren't necessarily that damaging unless he's got somebody who's just a non-threat with him. He is terrible to watch fight for an aesthetic purpose. If you really enjoy the wrestling aspect of fighting, then you can appreciate a lot of things in his game. However, if you want to watch a fight because you like to see a guy who likes to fight, Ben Askren is not the guy for you. If you like to watch a fight to see a back and forth entertaining shift and struggle, Ben Askren ain't the guy for you. So the UFC, who derided Demetrius Johnson for not being entertaining, exciting, or drawing in viewers, has decided that it is a better idea to bring in the pound-for-pound most aesthetically unappealing fighter in mixed martial arts, that being Ben Askren. So you tell me that I'm crazy when I said that the UFC wanted to get rid of Demetrius Johnson, and I now laugh at you if you did that, which a lot of you did, because now you're all seeing that, oh, holy smokes, he was right. Secondly, I will laugh at the UFC when they see the ratings for Ben Askren fights, when they try to justify Ben Askren not fighting for a title because they know he's poison to their viewers, but he's fought and won every fight he's had in dominant fashion, which he will in the UFC. And they're going to be stuck with this. So I am going to laugh at everybody involved in this, with the exception of Mighty Mouse, who I hope is getting good paydays, fighting for ONE FC. I know it won't be as good as the UFC payday, but I hope he gets the paydays he deserves. I hope he gets treated by the organization respectfully like a champion the way he deserves, like what the UFC didn't do with him. And I hope that we see Ben Askren poison UFC viewership to the point that they're turning in 0.0 ratings.
Hey, in fairness, I got laughed at for saying I thought they were just going to do away with flyweight entirely, which now also seems to be the case.
Oh, yeah, no, that was laughed about too, but guess what? That's going to happen.
I mean, somebody pointed this out. They've only got like 4 flyweight fights booked for the rest of 2018.
Yeah, they have no interest in keeping that division going.
Yeah, it's a shame as far as that goes, but thank you, Pat. You mentioned you wanted to be on. I'm happy to give you a platform whenever you want to.
Team Mighty Mouse, everybody. Team Mighty Mouse.
Ditto as far as that goes. Thank you, Pat.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Thanks to Pat again for being on the show. He's always happy to have him. Regrettably, we just again, this is recorded live. It's not edited. We couldn't fix whatever was up with whatever issues there were on with Jeff calling in. There was some weird thing where nothing he was saying was actually coming across Skype. I don't know if that's an issue on Skype. I don't know if that was a minor thing on Jeff's side. He looked into all of his stuff. We couldn't sort it out in a timely fashion, so my apologies to everyone, but this is just going to be me for the rest of the evening. I'm sorry, but this happens. Hopefully Jeff will get this sorted out, and Jeff will be back next week. All right. As for the fights from UFC Fight Night 138, I'll go ahead and just jump back into the regular format here now. Before I get into the fights themselves, this event. Oh boy. You know, this wasn't the worst event of the year. Let me start out by saying that. This really wasn't. This was not a good event, but this was not the worst event of the year. If I had to go off the top of my head for worst event of the year, I mean, we had the Ultimate Fighter finale, which was just not good. Boy, was that not good. Yeah, I mean, I almost don't know how much I want to count that because tough finales, like, do they really count? But that was bad. What was the other one? You had Hunt versus Olynyk, which was not good as an event. Santos versus Anders. That was alright. That wasn't great, but it was alright. What was the other one around Hunt versus Olynyk that was just awful? Gaethje versus Vic. Oh, God. Parts of the main card saved that card, because Figueiredo and Moraga was good for as long as it lasted. The finish to Anders and Williams, but that was a real up and down card. Rivera versus Moraes. I mean, I loved Rivera and for the 33 seconds, and I love Marlon, but that card, not so good. Really not so good. I'm just reliving it here. Jeez. So the point being, last night's event, not the worst card of the year, but boy was this bad. And not just bad, long. This was the most tedious fight night I have sat through in a while. I mean, from first fight, Stevie Ray and Yesena Yari, until the sign-off in the third round of Smith versus Ozdemir, this event clocked in at a little over This was almost over 6.5 hours. Because it started at 4:30 my time and it wrapped up a little after 11. This was a near 7-hour card. And it felt like a 7-hour card. It felt longer. I would have sworn an eternity passed. We passed into a new geological epoch between Stevie Ray winning and Anthony Smith winning. This was a horribly paced event. It just never ended. And there were some bad fights. There were some that weren't bad, but there were some bad fights on this card. There's just no getting around it. But the main event was not bad, necessarily. Not great, but I said at the time, for a small market fight night, this was an acceptable main event, and the fight itself played out in a generally acceptable fashion. Anthony Smith defeated Volkan Ozdemir via rear naked choke in the third round. I gave Ozdemir the first 2 rounds, but they were competitive. Smith was playing a waiting game with this fight. He was clearly banking on Ozdemir getting tired as the fight wore on. He was willing to engage with him, but he wasn't willing to brawl. He wasn't willing to play too much of Ozdemir's, quick game. And he wanted to wait for Ozdemir to slow down until he could capitalize on some of his deficiencies as the fight went on. Smart game plan. They hit each other a fair bit. Ozdemir had some nasty leg kicks. We hadn't seen much of his kicking game before this, but that man can chop with his kicks. He did a pretty decent number on Smith's lead leg. But Smith, he gutted through it. And he did a lot of really good defensive stuff. He let Ozdemir punch him in the arms and shoulders, and Ozdemir's not a light puncher, but that also means he puts a lot of energy into his punches, so he started throwing those. Anytime Smith got tagged and covered up, he just let Ozdemir keep going, because he was cognitive defensively, to just let Ozdemir burn that energy. Once Smith started landing with the right hand, he started doing some really interesting and different setups for it. He would he'd either fake a jab and then just land a long straight right. He really messed up the whole left side of Ozdemir's face with just that straight right. But he would dip and then throw the overhand. Because Ozdemir's defense is essentially non-existent. And once Smith got a read on that, he kept going to it, and not in the same way. It wasn't a repetitive type of setup and execution. He found different looks and then caught Ozdemir consistently. In the third round, he got a takedown, got the back. Really a textbook rear naked choke after that, especially if you're dealing with someone fighting 2-on-1, which is how you're supposed to do it. It's one of the, this is a very elemental, very basic way to finish the rear naked choke, but if you've got one arm kind of not under the chin but across the chin and the jaw, and they start fighting with that hand to kind of pull it down, you kind of let them pull it and then shoot the other arm under the chin while they're distracted, because they're yanking your arm, across their body, so it's suddenly in position to get to, grab your own bicep, go palm to palm, whatever your grip of choice happens to be. And that's what we got in the finish. Smith was tired. Oezdemir was tired after 3 rounds. I said at the time it was good it ended when it did, because I don't want to know what the 4th round of these two would have looked like. Now, one of them might have caught a second wind. I don't want to completely discount that possibility, but they were both sucking some serious oxygen by the time this one wrapped. I don't think either guy was really in 5-round condition. Or maybe they were, and the fight was just grueling enough to tax even appropriate levels of preparedness. That happens all the time. Smith said he feels he deserves a title shot. I could make a joke about light heavyweight, and I will. The division sucks. But even with a weak division, he's finished 2 former champions, granted both of them way over the hill and past their prime, but he just took out a former title challenger, and a guy in Oezdemir who still had Oezdemir's only loss in the UFC was to Daniel Cormier. And the only person who beats Daniel Cormier is John Jones, and John's the best. So you can only hold losing to DC so much against somebody. Again, after Gustafsson and Jones fight, I'd say Smith's next in line. Again, the division might suck, and it does, but you still have to keep the wheels turning. It's a really important part of keeping... Again, every division goes through peaks and valleys, goes through highs and lows. Middleweight was really bad for a time. Then it got really good. It's still really good. I think middleweight's not too far away from another lull, just because of the cyclical nature of these things, but again, it goes up, it goes down. That happens. When it's down, it's important to keep the wheels moving, keep the gears turning, keep the status... I hate to say status quo, because that's not necessarily what I mean, but you keep things going. Sometimes that means you take losses. Sometimes it means suboptimal fights. Sometimes it means a fight not necessarily everyone wants to see, but someone has earned. You keep that going because the downturn doesn't last forever. Again, even light heavyweight, which has been bad for a few years now, and the real problem with light heavyweight is the lack of up-and-coming talent that we can get excited about, but look, I'm down on the division. It won't last forever. If it does, it defies most conventional wisdom. If it just keeps sucking for a really extended period of time. Even heavyweight, which is the worst division in MMA, generally speaking, has periods where you have a bunch of top guys. Heavyweight for a period had Kane, Jr., Frank Mir on the resurgence, Brock Lesnar, Shane Carwin. That's a good crop of heavyweights. Not perfect, but that's a pretty solid division. Pretty solid top of the division. It falls off, it comes back. Welterweight, which has been one of the marquee divisions. Dan Hardy earned a essentially legitimate welterweight title shot because there wasn't a better option. That just happens sometimes. And Smith I think Smith's the deserving light heavyweight, contender now. Once Jones and Gustafsson fight, give Smith a shot at the winner, assuming there's no weirdness around that fight. I know that's a massive caveat, but assuming there's not a disputed finish, give Smith the next shot. I don't like his chances against either of those guys, but that's not always the point. The point is you give it to the next up in line. Maybe he might surprise us. Again, I may not like his chances. I'm not counting him out. Again, even against John. Again, will I pick him? No. Will I be shocked if he wins? Yes. Is it impossible? Not even close to impossible. Just very, very unlikely. But this is what has to happen sometimes. Sometimes you just go with who's next up. And Smith has earned his shot. Give that guy a lot of credit. Dude's fought over 40 times. Has a very solid UFC record. He's had ups and downs, and he's an entertaining fighter. Again, am I sold on him as how do I say this? he is not, from a technical standpoint, a standout. He is not, someone who really wows you with his performances, the way Gustafsson or John Jones do, or DC does. He's not that. He's an action fighter. He's a kill or be killed fighter. And he's had a lot of success since moving up to 205. And there are more than enough. There's a lot of instances of that being enough to legitimately earn a title shot. And occasionally, those guys surprise you and pull off major upsets. It happens. So, he says, again, he wants a title shot. I'm down. I completely would be okay with that man fighting for the belt. As for Oezdemir, this is 2 in a row, which is never good. But he's... Again, he lost to DC fighting for the title. No shame there. Lost to Smith, and Smith has turned out to be, pretty darn good. I don't know who he fights next. Misha Serkinov said he wanted a rematch. I'd be okay with that. I'd be okay with that, or let me pull up the old UFC light heavyweight rankings just because I want to feel suicidal. Because, yeesh. Let's see here. You could do him and Corey. I mean, he beat OSP already. You could do him and Corey Anderson. You could do him and Teixeira. You could do him and Latifi. Latifi's got a fight, I think. Again, there's plenty of fights for him. That's hardly, he's not without options as far as that goes. Boy, those rankings are going to change a lot come Monday. Because Smith is going to shoot up several places. Oezdemir is going to drop. You could do Oezdemir and Blachowicz. I don't know. Blachowicz is closer to a title shot than that and probably shouldn't be fighting someone on a 2-fight losing streak. But, again, there's fights for him. I still think he's someone worth keeping around. I mean, this is not a division that can really afford to lose talented fighters. The UFC gave up 2 of those already. And you want to keep the division moving. Sometimes you just got to keep some guys around. Again, I don't hate the rematch between Oezdemir and Serkinov at all. Especially because their first fight was so short. I mean, I might favor Oezdemir again, but I wouldn't hate a rematch. And again, solid fight. Nothing great, nothing... not fight of the year, not even a fight of the year contender, but an entertaining, upper level light heavyweight fight. There's only so much you could ask from this fight, and it gave you basically the best it was going to give you. I'm okay with that. After this, however, things go downhill. Michael Johnson missed weight. In fairness to Johnson, he took this fight on 2 weeks' notice, and he only missed by 1 pound. Which, I mean, a miss is a miss, largely speaking. But because he took the fight on such short notice, he got that close. I mean, he lost 30 pounds over that last week or so. I mean, it's some stupid amount of weight he cut. Nobody was going to throw him under the bus for this one. And anytime there's short notice like this, especially for a guy who... Featherweight's a non-trivial weight cut for Michael Johnson. Anytime this comes up, we all tend to be understanding. I'm understanding of Johnson in this case. I don't like a guy missing weight, but one has to always consider the circumstances. Anyway, Johnson defeated Artem Lobov via unanimous decision. Artem Lobov sucks. I don't know if I've said that enough. I tend to say it. I have to stop myself from typing it sometimes. When I'm writing, an intro for my coverage and I have to write out Artem Lobov, I usually actually do type out sucks and then have to delete it. Look, Lobov's in the UFC because he's friends with Conor McGregor. There is no other reason for him to be in the UFC. I mean, this is a guy with a losing professional record. The UFC had him going into this fight at 14-14. They have given him a win, I think, when he fought to get on to Tough. That he, I don't know, wasn't a... I don't think those are actual wins. They're not reported anywhere. And if you don't report them, there's things about how your official record is kept. So officially, to everyone except the UFC, the man is 13-15 with 1 draw and 1 no contest. He's on a 3-fight losing streak right now. He is 2-5 in the UFC. His only UFC wins are over Chris Avila, who went 0-2 and was then cut. I mean, Chris Avila was only brought in for UFC 202 to be a fight on the prelims where Conor McGregor's training partner, Lobov, could fight one of Nate Diaz's training partners, Avila. They both sucked. They both should have been cut. Then he beat Teruto Ishihara, whose only UFC wins are over guys who went like 0-1 or 0-2. I mean, look, Artem Lobov, I'm not saying to anyone who's, let me say this. If I fought Artem Lobov, he would smash me, alright? This is not me saying that I could beat him. Because I don't think I could, all things considered. Man's a professional fighter. That said, he's not a good professional fighter, and he does not meet the baseline standard of ability that I believe one has to have be in the UFC. About this fight, it was just Johnson being faster of hand, faster of foot, tagging and avoiding counters. I mean, it wasn't a good fight. I have a serious question about Michael Johnson at featherweight. I wonder how much his power will translate. I mean, what carried him at lightweight, largely, was very fast hands, surprising power, and mostly that. I mean, again, he won a few decisions. He's got a decent takedown, but his overall grappling is shockingly bad for a guy at his level. But he's had 3 fights at featherweight now, and apart from off-balancing Darren Elkins once, I mean, I don't think he wobbled Andre Fili. And Andre Fili doesn't exactly have a cast-iron chin. He off-balanced Lobov a couple of times, but he never really hurt him. I genuinely wonder how much of his power is lost in this weight cut. Because so much of his game is reliant on, again, fast hands and power when he gets there, that if he's missing some of that power from this cut, that removes a significant amount of what makes him a successful fighter. Again, I don't know. Again, Lobov has a good chin. I don't think he's ever been stopped with strikes, has he? I have to double check this now because he's got a bunch of losses. Decision, choke, decision. He's only been stopped with strikes once. So Lobov does have a chin. I mean, I don't think Cub Swanson really even wobbled Lobov. He hit him a lot, but I don't think he really, hurt him too many times. So the man's got a chin, and again, Andre Fili, not a cast iron chin, but Fili's... Jeez, he had a knee injury loss. Okay, the only guy to stop Fili with strikes is Yair Rodriguez, who caught him with that jumping switch kick and just knocked him out cold. So, Fili's got a decent chin. But I think it's a question that bears asking about Johnson's power down at lightweight, because... down at featherweight, because at lightweight, when he was hitting guys as often as he hit guys like Lobov and Fili, they were reacting much differently than Fili or Lobov did. Misha Serkinov defeated Patrick Cummins via arm triangle choke in the first round. Serkinov might have a little bit of the... I don't know what to call it. There has to be some kind of term for this, where you are winning the striking, but you're so used to forcing grappling exchanges that that's what you do even when you're winning striking exchanges. I mean, Thibault Gowdy, when he fought Sage Northcutt, did this. He would hurt him standing, land a good shot or two, and then force a clinch and a takedown attempt against the fence. Mirsad Bektic does this a little bit, where he's the better striker. I mean, against Elkins, this is literally what cost him the fight. He was smoking Darren Elkins on the feet, and then kept forcing some of these clinch wrestling positions. He did a little bit against Lamas, too. And that was more mutual against Lamas. They were both willing to grapple. But I think Serkinov might have a bit of that, where he hurts you, and then his immediate instinct is to force a grappling exchange, even when it's not in his best interest. There has to be some term for this that I'm just not aware of. If anyone knows, please tell me. I'm genuinely curious. If not, we have to coin it. But anyway, he did that. He caught Cummins with a pretty good punch. They clinched up. Cummins held a body lock. I mean, Serkinov's takedown defense is surprisingly stout. I mean, what got him in trouble with Teixeira, I think, was Teixeira just countered a takedown attempt that Serkinov tried. Here, he countered an attempted lateral drop from Cummins, landed in full mount, went to drop elbows, but Cummins' defensive position immediately opened up the arm triangle choke, so Serkinov, being a very good grappler, locked it up, passed to side control, forced the tap. Serkinov really needed this after his losing streak. Again, he called for a rematch with Uzdemir. I don't hate it, but there are other fights with him you could make as well, so nice to see a guy that we thought might have some potential in the division rebounding from that two-fight skid. Pat Cummins needs to go away. I mean, the man has taken so much head trauma over his last few fights. The fact that he didn't get hit in the head that often here is like the big win for him. I don't think he should be in the UFC at this point. Andrei Sukumtat defeated Jonathan Martinez via unanimous decision, 30-26 and 29-28 twice. There could have been a 10-8. There should have been. There should have been a 10-8 first round for Sukumtat. He dropped Martinez twice and very nearly had him finished before the round ended. Horrible decision by the referee in the second round of this fight. Completely swung that round in favor of Martinez. He called a non-existent groin strike. Now look, referees are imperfect, but this was really bad. Sukumtat was flurrying against the fence with body shots and knees, and Martinez was just kind of covering up. And he took a knee where the knee went to the body. The shin might have landed a bit. It was really dubious, and the referee called a break. He seemed to realize it as soon as he did it because he didn't give Martinez the full 5 minutes to recover. Just bad decision by the ref. Sukumtat, I was really down on after the O'Malley fight. I'm still not sold on him because he had a lot of size on Martinez. Martinez looks like a natural flyweight, but because the UFC is going to do away with flyweight, I mean, I'm pretty sure at least. And I'll get to that in more detail in a minute. He's up at bantamweight. Nasty body shots from Sukumtat. He had some really good body work in this fight, which I always appreciate. But he really needed the rebound win. I still don't know how he does against legitimate UFC level competition because he should have beaten Sean O'Malley and just brain farted his way into a loss. Again, not a bad fight. Speaking of bad fights, though, John Vellante defeated Ed Herman via split decision. This was the most light heavyweight fight ever. It was plodding. It was boring. It was two guys standing and swinging punches, missing most of the time. They both got a little bloody. They both landed. This was just the worst. This was just bad. If you want to know why I am down on light heavyweight in 2018, watch this fight and understand that this is essentially the average light heavyweight fight. It was terrible. This was awful. Cut both guys. Just terrible fight. Kicking off the main card, we had a non-trivial numerical upset. Court McGee, my boy. Sorry. For those of you not in on the joke, I live in Utah. Court McGee. I watched Court McGee's first 6, I think, professional fights, which he just did at a regional show that operates out of Salt Lake. And I watched on local access television at like 2:30 in the morning because I was suffering from chronic insomnia at the time. So I've got a soft spot for the guy. He defeated Alex Garcia via unanimous decision, 29-28 twice and won 30-28. Regarding the 30-28, I'm okay with it. It just means there was a 10-10 first round. Which I think is fair. all things considered. Garcia, very dangerous in the first round, faded in rounds 2 and 3. Just a typical Court McGee performance. So, good on him. So, again, utterly random feel-good win for me just because of, again, quasi-random association I have with the guy. I mean, not personally, but I associate things with him. So, good for him. Sean Strickland defeated Nordine Taleb via TKO in the second round. Not a bad fight, but not great. Taleb had a really good first round. Strickland just finally figured out where his right hand should be going in the second and clipped him and then didn't let him off the hook. Taleb protested the stoppage. Might have been... I don't think it was early. I do think it was... how do I say it? I do think it was... If it had gone on for another 4 or 5 punches, none of us would be complaining necessarily. But it also was... let me put it like this. I'd rather see this type of stoppage that is early but still justifiable than late stoppages. Just my personal opinion there. Nasrat Hakparas defeated T-Bolt Gowdy via unanimous decision 29-27, 29-28, and 30-26. Whoever did not give Hakparas a 10-8 third should not be judging. Hakparas has fast hands, but he tends to fire the same combination. And Gowdy got a read on it in the second round. Hakparas, again, fast hands, thudding puncher. Found Gowdy's chin a lot in the first, but not so much in the second. Then in the third, he just started landing body kicks that really had Gowdy in trouble. He doubled him over a couple of times. Hakparas, very young guy, 23, 24, something like that. Lot of potential. He's got to get some diversity into his strikes. He's got to get some... He plants his feet when he throws, which helps you with power, but also limits your offense. He only gets 1 or 2 off. Again, there's refinement that needs to happen with him, but a lot of potential in that guy. Definitely someone to pay attention to. Calvin Kattar defeated Chris Fishgold via TKO in the first round. This was basically as expected. Fishgold... Kattar was just probably... Kattar's a tall ask for your UFC debut, and Kattar just... methodical, let Fishgold flurry but miss or be blocked, landed decent counters, finally just landed a solid right behind the ear that off-balanced Fishgold. Kattar's someone to pay attention to at featherweight. I don't know how high he'll go, but his only loss is to Moicano, and Moicano's legitimately one of the, say, 5 best in the division. Talita Bernardo defeated Sarah Morris via unanimous decision. Not a good fight. This was a lot of just Bernardo utilizing traditional jiu-jitsu pressure against a more funky jiu-jitsu player. Not a lot here. Relatively dreadful fight. Don Madge scored a significant upset. He knocked out T. Edwards with a head kick in the second round. Don Madge was brought into this fight mostly to make Edwards look good because Edwards scored that, sub 30-second knockout on Dana White's Contender Series. Nobody told Don Madge. He buzzsawed Edwards in the first, wound up on his back for most of that round, and still, to my estimation, earned a 10-8. Had a near finish with an armbar. Just absolutely the dominant party. In the second round, he threw a left head kick that was blocked by Edwards, but blocked too close to his head, so it kind of got through and rattled him. Then Edwards tried to circle along the fence with his hands down, so Madge threw a high kick with the other leg and just blasted him into the dark lands. I'm certainly not going to, say Madge is great. He's a young guy. Edwards is a young guy. But anybody who has that kind of buzzsaw performance in their debut might flame out, don't get me wrong, but definitely at least has me interested in their next fight. Arjun Bueller, I think is how he wants that pronounced, defeated Marcelo Golm via unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, 29-27. This fight sucked. It was a crappy heavyweight fight. What do you want me to say, guys? It sucked. Stevie Ray defeated Yesin Ayari via unanimous decision. Pleasantly surprised this went to Ray. I scored it for Ayari, but all 3 rounds were relatively close. I have no issue with Ray winning. Again, I scored it for Ayari, but I'm not. But you could go. Realistically, you could go 30-27, I think, for either guy. There's less of a case for 30-27 Ray, but certainly possible. Again, that whole thing just lasted way too long. Way too many bad fights. Look at this point, 3 light heavyweight fights on the main card of an event is basically a human rights violation. This is criminal. This should not happen. Just not good. Somebody noted on Twitter, I think it was, boy, the UFC's deal with Fox and Fox Sports ends January of 19, where they moved to ESPN. Their last several of these fight night events are just not good. And really, I'm struggling to disagree with that. The next one is not the next event, but the next fight night on Fox Sports is their 25th anniversary event from Denver, which has the top 2 fights in that card are good. You have Chan Sung Jung, this is one of the news bits we'll talk about, because Frankie Edgar fell out of his fight with Chan Sung Jung. Yair Rodriguez is stepping in. Donald Cerrone's fighting Mike Perry on that card, so someone's going to die. One of those 2 might legitimately kill the other. But the rest of that card is not good. You have Raquel Pennington and Jermaine Durandamy. Joseph Benavidez and Ray Borg is a good fight on paper, but again, I'm convinced that division's going away. And I will need empirical evidence to the contrary. Then you have 2 UFC debutants at women's strawweight. You have Mike Trizano and Luis Pena. At least one of those guys was on a very recent season of Tough and this is just not a good card. Yeah, that is really not a good card. You got Davi Ramos on the Fight Pass prelims, but Ashley Yoder and Amanda Cooper on Fox. Never mind. I'll yell about that card later. Then you have Magny versus Ponzinibbio. That card. Let me clarify this. That card has the potential to overperform relative to what it looks like on paper, but not a whole lot there. You have the Heavy Hitters finale, which will be on Fox Sports 1. That has Rafael dos Anjos and Kamaru Usman. I like both those guys, and give a lot of credit to RDA, who is coming off of that 5-round fight with Colby Covington that I think he won. He's fighting a slightly different, but essentially, because Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington have a lot of similarities, a lot of wall and stall wrestling. To go from fighting Covington to Usman, give RDA credit, man. That man will fight anyone. But I mean, your next fight down on the card listed so far is Pedro Munoz and Brian Caraway. Just not a very... It's really not a good card. Jeez. Melendez. No. I think that's really not good. And then the Dos Santos versus Tuivasa fight. Let me look at that. I mean, Dos Santos and Tuivasa is a pretty good heavyweight fight. I'm going to see if Tuivasa is really ready to step up or if JDS is just that shot. Mark Hunt's fighting Justin Willis. Tyson Pedro's fighting Shogun. Oh, Shogun. Again, that's another one that might... There's a very clear path in my mind for that fight night being a fun night of fights, an entertaining night. It's contingent on a few of those fights going one way. And then you have the UFC on Fox card, which is Lee versus Iaquinta, which is a good fight. Not great, but a good one. Barboza and Hooker's a good fight. Beyond that, it's a lot of guys you're hoping overperform. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of these last events on Fox Sports 1 that are just, let's run out the clock. But thank you to everyone who followed along with that. I know there were a few of you who suffered alongside me. It was appreciated. Boy, that was... Again, it was just a long event. More than bad, it was just interminably long and dull. So dull. Huge stretches of this card, just dull. But a lot of you did stick around and follow along with me live, so I do profoundly appreciate that. Thank you guys very much. But that leads us to this coming Saturday, where we have UFC UFC 230. We lost Ruslan Magomedov from this card. That annoys me. I was looking forward to Magomedov and Rogerio de Lima. I mean, I kind of like Ruslan Magomedov. He's a heavyweight I kind of enjoy watching. That's a rarity. I want more of him. Oh well, such is life. This card has gone through some changes. It spent most of the year without a main event. Then a rumored main event that everyone crapped on. Then a signed main event that everyone crapped on. Then a signed main event that we all kind of went, alright, and shrugged our shoulders. We lost the most intriguing fight on this card, which was Nate Diaz and Dustin Poirier. We lost the second most intriguing fight on this card, which was Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold in a rematch of their title fight. But we've cobbled together a watchable card, all things considered, which, these days, call it a win. In the main event, we have... I'm curious about the chronology here, because I believe the UFC is still saying that Daniel Cormier is the double champion of both light heavyweight and heavyweight. But Jones and Gustafsson are fighting for the vacant belt at UFC 231. They'll probably strip DC like the day of 231 or something. But he gets to have both belts for the promotional materials for this, apparently. But Daniel Cormier defending his heavyweight belt against Derek Lewis. This fight came together at the last minute. It's really obvious this fight came together at the last minute. Cormier's got a hand injury that he'll be fighting through. Derek Lewis was last seen getting bludgeoned by Alexander Volkov for 13 minutes and change before landing a Hail Mary right hand. It's rushed, but the UFC wanted a title fight in the main event, and they apparently threw enough money at these two to make it happen under this circumstance, so I can't imagine picking Derek Lewis to win this fight. I mean, Lewis is a big guy, and Lewis can actually kick for a round before he gasses. And that's, really a good kicking game is one of the keys to besting Cormier, because Cormier's striking game is a lot of the mummy guard, which is your hands out from your body, and once they start striking at you, you extend your arms all the way, kind of like, the Frankenstein or the mummy from traditional horror movies, and you just kind of parry them off to the side. Works pretty good against punches. It leaves you wide open for kicks, though, which is how John bested him rather handily. It's how Gustafsson hurt him. A combination of knees and uppercuts up the middle when Cormier's hands were extended that he just wasn't in a position to block. That were a lot of his success in their fight. So Lewis could, in theory, land a left high kick up the side of Cormier's head, but I don't think he sets them up very well, and that's, by contrast, what John Jones does so well, especially against Cormier. He set up that kick. Lewis's takedown defense isn't great. He tries to counter, but he's also never fought someone with anywhere near the grappling credentials of Daniel Cormier. Lewis's ability to get up is impressive, but it also constantly leaves his back open. Now, DC's not some master of the back, but he's probably good enough to, when Lewis sits up, just spin around and get his back. I got Cormier here. I got Cormier all day. I'm not going to tell you to bet the house, because if you bet the house on an MMA fight, you're pretty stupid. There's just too many variables, but, I mean, outside of a lucky punch, I don't see Derek Lewis winning this fight. And maybe the UFC will bring Brock Lesnar in again to shove DC around after the fight. Set up their inevitable fight at some point in 2019. Your co-main event is now Chris Weidman and Ronaldo Jacare Souza. Again, both those guys were already on the card. Weidman was fighting Rockhold before Rockhold fell through. Souza was fighting Branch. Branch is still on the card fighting somebody else. Jacare's coming off of that loss to Kelvin Gastelum in May of this year. I don't remember if I thought he won that or not. I have to look at my coverage. But Jacare's also 40-ish, 38. He's getting up there. I'm torn on this one because both guys are good strikers. Not great, but good. Both men are exceptional grapplers. Both men's grappling is also heavily predicated on being on top. Weidman's the better wrestler, but Souza's got a really good ability to set up his takedowns and get on top. Again, I'm torn. Both guys are capable of winning this fight. It's a very close fight on paper. I know Jeff was leaning heavily towards Jacare. I think his exact words were Jacare is going to destroy Weidman. I'm leaning towards Souza just a little bit. But if he gets out-wrestled, it wouldn't surprise me. So, again, I got Jacare, but slightly. David Branch, again, still on the card. He was going to fight Jacare. Now he's fighting Jared Cannonier. Cannonier, this is his middleweight debut. At light heavyweight, he went... Let me see. He knocked out Cyril Asker at heavyweight. I mean, he's 3-4 overall in the UFC. His losses at light heavyweight are to Glover Teixeira, Jan Blachowicz, and Dominic Reyes. That's not... Again, those are not ham and eggers. Those are pretty solid guys, but he's trying his hand at middleweight. I'm torn here again because Cannonier is the kind of fighter that can give Branch problems, but Branch's only loss since returning to the UFC is to Luke Rockhold. Had that massive winning streak. I'll go with Branch. He'll probably make me look stupid for doing so, but I'll go with Branch. Carl Roberson is fighting Jack Marshman. Roberson 1-1 in the UFC. Lost to Cesar Ferreira, and Ferreira's not a joke. Whereas Marshman, coming off of that loss to Antonio Carlos Jr., because he just got out-grappled by Shoeface, man. Everybody gets out-grappled by Shoeface. It's a tough one. Oh, this is the Hammer. I remember Jack Marshman. Okay, I saw a picture. I know who Jack Marshman is. Probably pick him to beat Carl Roberson, but those are two guys with a lot of unknown qualities. And kicking off the main card, we have Derek Brunson versus Israel Adesanya. This is a pretty stiff test for Adesanya. He's coming off of that win over Brad Tavares in a 5-round fight, which was a relatively stiff test in and of itself. Derek Brunson's striking technique is just so bad. Dude leaves his chin way up in the air. He leads with it sometimes. It is literally the first thing in his, like, if you drew a line from his heels to from his back to his front, what is furthest forward towards his opponent is his chin. I'll go with Adesanya there, but I won't be shocked if Brunson pulls this off. Let's see. Ugh. Yeah, the prelims for this are not all that great. Jason Knight's fighting Jordan Rinaldi. Jason Knight, man. 3-fight losing streak. Had some pretty high hopes for that guy. He went on a good winning streak. And he beat some good guys. But, no, lost to Lamas, lost to Benitez, lost to Makwan Amirkhani. He's fighting against Jordan Rinaldi. Rinaldi got beat by Gillespie, beat by Trujillo. Oh, this will be his featherweight debut. Got hit with a Von Flue choke. Okay, this is a gimme. Look, you get caught with a Von Flue choke, you shouldn't be in the UFC. That's all I'm saying. Doesn't mean there aren't good guys who have been caught in that with that in the past. Doesn't mean, you're a bad... Doesn't necessarily mean you're, a hopeless case, but if you're fighting in the UFC, there's a certain there's a set of techniques that you should always... excuse me. Always know how to deal with and never really be caught in. Such as the omoplata, the go-go plata, the Ezekiel choke, the Von Flue choke. Largely a toe hold. I mean, toe holds are a little bit different because if someone cranks it just right, those can be nasty, but you really shouldn't be caught in a toe hold if you're in the UFC. What's another really gimmicky submission? Stuff like the Peruvian necktie. I mean, these are just not really things you should be caught with if you're a professional fighter at the level of, at the UFC level. Doesn't mean that if you get caught in that, you're the worst fighter in the world or that you can't get better, but this is pretty clearly not the level of opposition you should be facing. So I got Knight there, but Rinaldi might make me look... No, he won via Von Flue choke. God, I feel stupid. And again, if you get caught in, if somebody gives that to you and you take it, then I have no issue with you trying it. Plenty of omoplatas attempts have been used for sweeps or scrambles. It's not a bad thing to try it. It's a bad thing for you if you get caught in it because you should know what to do. I'm still going with Knight, but it's not a gimme. I apologize. That's me operating on incorrect information. Sijara Eubanks fights Roxanne Modafferi. This was supposed to crown the first ever women's flyweight champion before Eubanks missed weight and had to be pulled from the card. Modafferi's on a 2-fight winning streak? No, just one. She lost to Nico Montano, then she stopped Barb Honchak. Honestly, the most impressive performance of Modafferi's career. Because I thought she was going to lose that fight, and she stopped Barb pretty cleanly. I like Modafferi here. But, is there a but that I need to attach to that? I mean, Eubanks isn't bad, and she's getting better, whereas Modafferi, we kind of know what we're getting at this point. So, I like Modafferi, but not to the exclusion of Eubanks potentially winning. Julio Arce fights Shimon Moraes. I kind of like Shimon Moraes there. Ben Saunders fights Lyman Good. Ben Saunders, man. I mean, you're 1-3. You're 1-3 in your last 4, and that win is over Jake Ellenberger, which means nothing. Is Lyman Good gonna beat him though? Let's see, because Good 1-1 in the UFC. I'll go with Good there. I mean, I like Saunders. I like to watch Saunders, but I think he's a bit over the hill. On Fight Pass, Matt Frivola fights Lando Venata. This is kind of do or die for Lando, who's only got one win in the UFC. Spectacular win. He knocked out John McDessie with a wheel kick. But since then, lost to David Tamer, went to a draw with Bobby Green, lost to Drakkar Klose. This is kind of do or die for him. Shane Burgos will fight Kurt Hollebow. I kind of like Burgos there. I mean, Burgos is coming off of that Cater loss, but even that was a very competitive fight. Brian Kelleher fights Montel Jackson. This is kind of a gimme for Kelleher after he got starched by John Lineker. And Adam Oh, he has this. He has a different pronunciation than I think of when I look at this, even knowing it's Polish. I'm just going with Vijarek. Adam Vijarek is stepping in for Ruslan Magomedov to fight Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Kind of going with de Lima here, who missed weight twice at light heavyweight and got Von Flue choked. Jeez. I mean, bear in mind, I think that means he probably shouldn't be in the UFC. But it's heavyweight, and that does change the equation just a little bit. Short notice for Vizarek too. Yeah, go with de Lima, but if he loses, I won't be shocked because he got Von Flue. Just shouldn't happen in the UFC. Real easy way to avoid it. Alrighty, and again, next Saturday we'll have live coverage of that in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania, so please stop by, say hello, that's always appreciated. As for news, alright, again, a couple of things. Let's do the major one last because I have talking points around that. Again, for fights, Frankie Edgar got injured and fell out of the UFC's 25th anniversary show, which is weird because I don't actually... It's weird. Like I think the UFC has the same thing like the WWE does, where they don't understand how anniversaries work in terms of numerically. Because remember, WWE spent the whole year like promoting WrestleMania 25 as the 25th anniversary of WrestleMania, which it isn't. It's the 25th WrestleMania. WrestleMania 26 is technically the 25th anniversary of WrestleMania. The same way when you're married, your first anniversary is celebrating your marriage, but it's your second. It starts your second year of marriage. Like it's not. Again, your first anniversary is your second year. It's not your first year. It's just a thing that I'm not. Again, I have to double check the math on this, is whether or not the UFC is fudging this number or not, but I don't think they are. Anyway, Frankie Edgar fell out of his fight with Chan Sung Jung. Now Yair Rodriguez steps in to fight the Korean Zombie. This went from a fight where the Zombie's probably going to get smashed to a fight where the Zombie probably does the smashing. Look, I am not sold at all on Yair Rodriguez at all. And I think Chan Sung Jung... I mean, he might lose because, Korean Zombie's got plenty of holes in his game, but... I don't know, I see more holes in Rodriguez's game than I do in the Zombies, so we'll see. What else? There was some other fight announcement. I have to look this up because I don't want to get it wrong. We talked last week about the Nevada State Athletic Commission still filing a grievance against Conor as well as Khabib for the post-fight brawl at 229. More video of Chuck Liddell's pad work ahead of his fight with Tito Ortiz came out, and it is just awful. It is just the saddest thing in the world, man. If you watch Chuck Liddell hitting the pads with his trainer, it's just sad. It is just a sad, sad thing. I seriously question whether or not California should even license that fight. At a minimum, because of the age and history of both of the main event fighters, both Tito and Chuck, there need to be extra medical precautions. I mean, if they both pass those, then fine. Like, I can't... There's only so much reasonable restriction that should be placed on this, but there should be there's an increased threshold of reasonability that goes into Chuck Liddell at almost 50, fighting Tito Ortiz at almost 50, and Chuck having been knocked out cold in his last 4 fights. 3, 4? The fact that I can't remember is not a good thing. There should be increased medical screening for that fight. That's all I'm saying. Let's see. I think that's it. Gunnar Nelson, Alex Oliveira got 231 got fleshed out a little bit. We have Gunnar Nelson, Alex Oliveira. That's a good card. I think they fleshed out UFC Fight Night 140, which I already talked about. Yeah, all right. Let's get to the big news of the week then. It was announced that the UFC was essentially looking to engage in a trade. And it's a good thing MMA flies under the radar for so much legality, because a lot of what they do operates in gray area. But the UFC just agreed, and Pat covered a lot of this at the beginning. The UFC agreed to release Demetrious Johnson from his contract so he could sign with ONE if ONE would release Ben Askren, so Ben Askren could then sign with the UFC. All parties wanted this to happen because both Demetrious Johnson and Ben Askren are not employees. They are independent contractors. I mean, Ben Askren could have said, sure, Demetrious gets released, Askren gets released, DJ signs, and Askren then gives the UFC the finger. He could have done that. But again, everyone seemed to be interested in this transfer happening. Everybody went through with it. So Demetrious Johnson, one of the greatest of all time, owner of the most dominant championship reign in UFC history, a couple of the most spectacular finishes in UFC history, certainly the best submission in UFC history, is now on his way to ONE, where he will be paid a lot, hopefully. I mean, Eddie Alvarez just signed with ONE as well for a lot of money. That was the other news story. Was Eddie Alvarez officially signed with ONE? And let me say this, because there's two divergent points here. Certain fighters, when they sign with a promotion like ONE, you might even get the sense that they're ducking real opposition. I mean, when Askren signed there, the UFC didn't want him when he left Bellator. But Ben Askren, in essentially his athletic prime, went to ONE FC and beat up a bunch of cans for a lot of money, and I don't begrudge him that. But there's a significant difference between a fighter in his athletic prime not going to fight the best and someone like, say, Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez has fought everybody. Eddie Alvarez, he's been a champion everywhere, including the UFC. And this guy will fight. He's going to get paid a lot by ONE, apparently. And if he wants to ride out his career getting paid a lot of money for lower risk fights, with Eddie Alvarez's history, Godspeed, man. This guy has given us some of the greatest fights ever. His fights with Michael Chandler, great fights. Truly great fights. That first Chandler fight's one of the best lightweight fights you'll ever see. It's great. He came into the UFC and debuted against Donald Cerrone, of all people. He fought, Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez, Rafael dos Anjos, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier twice. Eddie's fought everybody. If he wants to plan out the last few years of his fighting career like this, Eddie Alvarez never ducked anyone. If this is how he wants to go out now after all he's accomplished, Godspeed, man. Demetrious Johnson beat everybody in that division. Literally, just about everybody. They had to get a rematch for him in a fight that I still think he won. And even if you think Cejudo won, it was incredibly close. That's a razor-thin decision. And, a long-reigning champion doesn't get an immediate rematch off of a razor-thin split decision. Again, do I think Pat's a little extreme in his view about it being, about how that goes down in the totality of the UFC's thought process? Yeah, Pat might be a little bit on the tinfoil-y side. Not too far. But stuff like this lends credence to it. When that guy, who, again, 11 consecutive title defenses, multiple years as champion, one of the most dominant champions ever, in his last several fights, throughout his entire title reign, he gave up, 5 rounds? Because the first Benavidez... Okay, so if we... Actually, less. If we exclude the first Benavidez fight, if we exclude his title-winning performance, he gave up at least 1 round, if not... probably 2 to Dodson. Actually, I have to look up the man's record now because there's a few of those fights. I love DJ, but a few of those fights were dubious. Well, hey, we have who we have. So, gives up 2 rounds to Dodson. Okay, not one to Moraga. Knocks out Benavidez in the first round in their rematch. Doesn't lose a round to Bogatinov. Doesn't lose a round to Carriasso. At best, maybe one to Horiguchi. Maybe. So call that no lost rounds, because again, if nothing else, it's dubious. Loses no rounds in the Dodson rematch. Knocks out Henry Cejudo in the first round. Gives up 1 round to Tim Elliott, and then wins all 4 others, including a 10-8. Does not lose a round beating Wilson Hayes. Does not lose a round beating Ray Borg, including multiple 10-8s. Yeah, the dude lost maybe 6 rounds over his entire title reign. So yeah, from 2012 to 2000. So for 6 years, the man lost less than 7 rounds. Okay, if we go to 12, that actually is going to call into question the Ian McCall fights. So yeah, they had the draw, where he gave up again. So I think he only gave up 1 round. Again, should have been a 10-8 round in that particular instance necessarily to get at the draw, but alright, so 1 round. Wins the rematch, I think 30-27. If not, he only gave up 1. So, 2, that's 2 rounds. 2 rounds of the Benavidez fight bring us to 4 total. Then 2 in the Dodson fight, 2 or 1. We'll call it 2, so we're at 6. 7 for the Elliott fight. And then, again, officially 3, I suppose, for the Borg fight. So yeah, 10 rounds. He lost a grand total of 10 rounds over 6 years. And, what is that, 13 fights? 14? That's an insane level of, again, dominance. And you don't give that guy an immediate rematch off of, again, a debatable split decision. I don't think the UFC wants flyweight around anymore. I really don't. But Demetrius is going to 1, and I don't begrudge DJ at all. This is a guy who had a pretty public falling out with the UFC at various points. I mean, the UFC didn't really know how to promote him properly. And in fairness to the UFC, Demetrius does not promote well the way they normally promote fighters. You can't just throw Demetrius in a press conference like you can Conor. You can't set his highlight reel to Face the Pain. I hate that song. So all the UFC's basic tools for promotion, which is give you a big platform and set you to crappy new metal, don't work with DJ. Doesn't mean the UFC didn't try. It means there's a question about just how good at their job are they. But DJ never really took off. But, I mean, what else was he going to accomplish apart from regaining his title? Because he didn't want to move up to bantamweight. He's really undersized at bantamweight. I think Demetrius would be a top 10 bantamweight, but I don't think he'd be borderline top 5, but he'd never be champion. I mean, really, again, I love DJ. You going to pick him over Dominic Cruz or TJ Dillashaw? I'm not. Not a bantamweight. I might pick him over TJ if TJ cut to 125 and that cut visibly drained him. But at bantamweight, no. And again, I love DJ. If that fight had ever happened, I would have been rooting for him, but I can't pick him. You gonna pick him over Cody Garbrandt? I mean, there's a question about how much Garbrandt lost after 2 consecutive knockout losses, but outside of that, no. Not going to pick him over Cruz. Over Moraes? I don't know. That's a tough sell for me. I kind of like Moraes in that fight. I mean, I still like DJ, but there's a serious size issue. And that's exacerbated once guys figure out weight cutting. And when you get to guys like, could he beat Rafael Assunção? Yeah, he'd probably outpoint Assunção. But it's a tough road for him if he wanted to move up to bantamweight, so if he's going to 1, I hope he gets paid, and I wish him all the best, man. I love DJ to death as a fight fan. So, and part of the reason I think, again, I said as soon as Henry Cejudo won that title and said, I want to fight TJ Dillashaw, like, okay, they're done with the division. I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that that's kind of the direction they're heading. You have your champion, who just won the belt, who does not want to fight in the division. I mean, he wants to go up and lose brain cells against TJ Dillashaw. All right, buddy. Go for it. I mean, and in all seriousness, if he goes up and loses, your champion just got smoked by a guy in up a weight class, sure, don't get me wrong, but it's not a good look. I mean, it never is. If he goes up and wins, nobody defends 2 belts. It's one of the, I mean, becoming a simultaneous 2-weight world champion is an impressive feat, but no one has ever, on a major scale, let me clarify this. I need to double check this about one of the guys I'm going to reference here. Because I don't wish to be wrong about this. Yeah, okay. This is true. Okay, the first ever simultaneous 2-weight world champion in a major promotion is Dan Henderson. He won the welterweight title in Pride, which was their 183-pound title. And then he went up and won the 205-pound title. And they were named differently in Pride, but he won their equivalent of middleweight and light heavyweight. Dan Henderson won the welterweight middleweight title in 2005 and did not defend it. Ever. He beat Vanderlei to become their also light heavyweight, again, middleweight light heavyweight champion, and the promotion folded. Then he lost to Quentin Jackson and Anderson Silva, trying to unify those belts. So, Dan Henderson, first guy to ever do it, first ballot Hall of Famer, all things considered, never defended either title he won. The next guy to do it was Conor McGregor, who famously never defended a title. Daniel Cormier, light heavyweight champion, multiple title defenses. Well, such a weird thing. Like, his reign is so weird in some respects, but he at least had 2. Again, Oezdemir and Gustafsson, title defenses. Goes up, wins heavyweight, now a 2-weight world champion. As a 2-weight world champion, giving up the light heavyweight belt. No one has ever been a 2-weight world champion and defended both belts. You know, the first time somebody does that in the UFC, that will be the most impressive feat in combat sports. Well, one of. Let me clarify. One of. Because that is unbelievably difficult. I mean, defending it once in one weight class is incredibly difficult. Defending 2 belts across 2 weight classes, first time somebody does that while holding both belts at the same time. That will be an unbelievable achievement in combat sports. And it's one that everyone who has accomplished winning 2 belts at the same time has not done. So, the point being, if Henry Cejudo wins the bantamweight title, he is not going to then defend flyweight. I mean, it's just not going to happen. The UFC is cycling that division out. I mean, there's still, again, for the sake of, the rest of the year, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 9 UFC events left in the year. Assume each event has 12 fights. You can all do the math. Of those announced fights, and I think, 232 is when Gustafsson and Jones are fighting. Not 231. God, I'm stupid. Of all the announced fights, there are a grand total of, I think, 4 flyweights on the men's side of things. And all of those involved ranked opposition. Yeah, you have Hasten win. Okay, you have one. You have literally one on Fight Night 142. That are unranked flyweights, and that's just because Ashkan Mokhtarian is a local. I think it's pretty clear that they're just phasing this division out. They gave it a go, and the market reacted. I'm not happy about it. I don't like it. But I also am not going to pretend that, Demetrius's reign, as awesome as it was for fight fans who pay attention, if you like Demetrius Johnson's fights, then his reign was awesome. But the vast majority of the MMA fan base is casual to an absurd degree. I mean, guys, if you're listening to this podcast, congratulations, you're on the hardcore scale. But everyone who, McGregor and Nurmagomedov did 2.6, 2.4 million pay-per-view buys. UFC 230 is going to do a fraction of that. They're going to be lucky to... 500,000 would probably be a win for that card. I mean, UFC 228, the one before 229, did less... Oh, good lord. 130,000 buys, give or take. So less than 200. Everybody that watched Conor and Khabib, the majority, they're casual fans. They come in and out. And they are the vast majority of the audience. And the vast majority of the audience is not interested in men's flyweight. It sucks. It does not speak well of the fight palette of the casual fan base. But that is also the reality in which we find ourselves, and I can't ignore it. But for this, the UFC gets Ben Askren. Now, I find Ben Askren to be an interesting fighter to watch. For most people, that means he's like watching paint dry, I think was the phrase Pat used. If you want an intro to Ben Askren, I don't actually recommend his fights. There's a multi-part study on him that BJJ Scout has done. They're all up on YouTube. Watch those. I found them incredibly helpful in understanding Ben Askren, especially his fighting. And they gave me an appreciation for the man's abilities that I did not have before. And have helped me see the ways other fighters are doing things a little bit differently. I think some of what Ben has done is fascinating. Especially relative to how MMA is... BJJ Scout calls it attacking the meta. And if you're unfamiliar with what, the meta game is... It just refers to the generally assumed knowledge. And for the longest time, MMA fighting, a lot of it, adopted the positional understanding, the positional hierarchy of competitive jiu-jitsu. Now that's not by accident. There's incredible value in the scoring criteria of competitive jiu-jitsu and the positional hierarchy that it employs. But in an MMA fight, it's not the be-all, end-all. And rather than go along with all of the traditional understanding of what positions are the most valuable and what you should do in a certain position, Ben Askren adapted his folk-style wrestling base into MMA in positions where jiu-jitsu would tell you to do one thing. He did something different. And it completely shut down a lot of guys who expected him to try and take the back, which would then give them an opportunity to scramble. And instead, he's just sitting in this wrestling ride, and punching you in the face. Now, Ben doesn't hit all that hard, so it takes a lot of shots. But, I mean, Khabib does kind of the same thing in a lot of respects. And Khabib, I think, in no small part does it because of the success Ben Askren found. I don't think those two things are purely coincidence. But Ben Askren, despite being interesting to a lot of us very cerebral fight fans, is not exactly fan-friendly to the casual fan. I expect Ben Askren to go undefeated in the UFC. I also expect him to win, I don't know how many fights he signed on for, but if it's, say, a 5-fight deal, I expect him to win all 5 and for the UFC to just not renew his deal at the end of it. Unless he becomes a bizarre draw all of a sudden because he's kind of a loudmouth. But apart from that, I expect him to go undefeated, to embarrass a few guys, and for at the end of it, the UFC to go, please, please go away. We just don't want you here anymore. That said, I do look forward to Ben Askren in the UFC. The man's undefeated and asks some interesting questions. I think he is a UFC caliber fighter. So, again, I don't know what Demetrius will do in one. I mean, I imagine he will become their flyweight champion in his first fight. He'll fight for the belt and win it. I expect him to get paid because the man did about as much as you can do in the UFC. And he did it with minimal notice, a lot of fan derision, a non-trivial amount of promotional acrimony. I think it's fair to say that the relationship between Demetrius and the UFC was not really harmonious. And if his decision after, solidifying himself and becoming one of the best to ever do it is, I'm going to go get paid. Again, same thing with Eddie, man. This isn't someone ducking competition. This isn't someone, trying to get away from tough fights. Demetrius, he fought whoever they put in front of him at flyweight. And if your major criticism is, well, he should have gone up to bantamweight, no. There is no particular onus on him to do so, any more than there is on Jose Aldo to move up to lightweight, or Tyron Woodley to move up to middleweight. Now, don't get me wrong. Would I have been interested to see him fight up at bantamweight while being flyweight champion? Yeah. I'm a fan. I'm interested in all of Demetrius's fights. But there's no... If he doesn't want to... I mean, shouldn't we be... really, in an era of guys like Conor, who hold up a division for years on end, or... I'll throw Henry under the bus a little bit here, or Henry Cejudo, who on the mic after winning the belt goes, I want to move up and fight TJ. Shouldn't we really applaud a guy whose mentality was just fine, bring the next one along? I will be here, I will keep the division going, and I will just stand my post as champion of this division, and I will fight until I lose. Shouldn't that mentality, even if you're not a fan of his fights, that mentality is something MMA needs a bit more of. And if that guy, after that reign, decides he wants to go get paid fighting a lower level of opposition, I mean, what more does DJ have to prove to anybody? Again, the only thing that everyone kind of knocks him for was he didn't go up and fight TJ Dillashaw, who's kind of a killer. Or, Cody Garbrandt, who's also kind of a killer. Like, that's your big gripe? Was there a giant, is there a giant cloud over the career of, Shogun for never going up to heavyweight? Or even John Jones for never going up to heavyweight? I mean, granted, John still might, but... Or how about, okay, let's choose someone who actually had a lengthy reign of note. Who was complaining that Matt Hughes never went up to middleweight and fought Rich Franklin? Anybody? Anybody think Chuck should have gone up to heavyweight and challenged Tim Sylvia? Anybody? Now, granted, neither of their reigns were as long or as dominant in some respects as DJ's, but the point remains. If your only criticism is, well, I want to see them fight up in weight, that means they have established their dominance to such a monumental degree over their division that, the act of attaining that status and that level of dominance isn't in and of itself worthy of being considered, again, amongst the greats of all time. Whether you think DJ is the actual greatest, there's room for debate. I'm not going to die on that particular hill. There's a variety of opinions that are correct, that can be construed as correct, and probably that are. But, again, if DJ wants to go get paid, I don't think DJ's running from anybody. I think he doesn't like being in the UFC anymore. And I think the UFC is gearing up to get rid of flyweight, and I don't think he wants to fight at bantamweight. And if that's the case, he needs to go where there's a flyweight division. And in this case, that's one, because Bellator doesn't have one. Which should also tell you something about the North American appetite for men's flyweight. It's just not there. I mean, if even Bellator isn't throwing out a loose attempt at a division, there's not a lot of demand for it. So I wish both guys luck, you know? Watching Ben do what Ben Askren does is going to be hilarious to me, and watching people react to it. But that's the... Yeah, again, about flyweight going away, that doesn't mean tomorrow they're going to announce the disillusionment of the division, but this time next year, I'll be surprised if there's an active men's flyweight division. You might see the occasional flyweight fight, because, I mean, even when the UFC didn't have a lightweight champion, they had the occasional lightweight fight. But I do not think you're going to have a functional division in 12 months' time. Alright, let me see. Is there any other news? We covered Eddie, we covered the trade, a few fight announcements. I'm going to call that good. Alright, thank you everyone for listening. Much appreciated. We'll be back next week to review UFC 230. Hopefully we won't have these same technical issues and Jeff will be able to join me. Us. I always say us. Until then, again, you can find me Saturday covering UFC 230. You can find me, I believe, Tuesday reviewing, I think, the most recent season of Voltron on Netflix. Need to double check that. But I'm pretty sure I have something to do this Tuesday to review with Mark, so I'll double check that. You can find... I mean, really, the best thing to do is just follow the Radulich and Broadcasting Network on Facebook. It gets updated with all of our stuff. Mark occasionally laments his schedule, because he schedules things and then plans change. It amuses me. Alright, I will see you all next week if nothing else, so thank you very much again for your continued support. I hope one day to actually deserve it. Stay safe out there, and please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.